This guy wrote this, and this, and this. But there's one thing you need to know before listening to Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov. He had no idea what he was doing. You may think I'm exaggerating here, but I'm not. Korsakov became a composer of classical music with zero knowledge of theoretical concepts. He just knew how to play piano from his childhood lessons, and he liked music enough to want to write it. Rimsky was one of the most important music teachers of his era. His star pupil, Stravinsky, went on to change the face of classical music and even art itself. But that's for another day. Today, it's just about Rimsky Korsakov. I care about Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov for 3 reasons. His story is interesting, his music is great, and his legacy is underappreciated. Let's start with the groundwork. Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov was born into a noble family. He took piano lessons from a young age, but he didn't care much for playing the instrument itself. He preferred reading about naval voyages and fell in love with the sea after being inspired by his older brother, Voyn. Rimsky kept taking music lessons at the request of his family and worked to join the Imperial Navy at the age of 18. It was during his teenage years when Rimsky fell in love with music as a whole. He didn't have a knack for performing, but his listening skills were extraordinary. The young Nikolai would visit the opera, the orchestra, and keep taking music lessons with his piano teacher until he turned 17. Even then, after his limited musical training, Rimsky was encouraged to keep playing by his teacher, Theodor Kanil. Kanil even introduced Nikolai to Balakirev and some other composers as well, who would each become close peers to him later on in his career. It was Nikolai Balakirev who encouraged Nikolai to keep writing down his musical ideas when he wasn't off at sea. As time went on, however, Rimsky grew sick of working on his symphony in between his naval work, and eventually stopped writing music altogether for months on end. Through it all, Balakirev kept encouraging Korsakov to write music. The older mentor figure would constantly revise the young sailor's compositions and send them back, ruthlessly pointing out every imperfection until the piece could keep getting better. Korsakov and Balakirev composed in a Russian nationalistic style that neglected the precise technical concepts of Western classical music. This means that Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov wrote music based on his intuitions rather than just rigorous theory at first. The ideas of the two composers were a mix of bringing traditional folk music to life and attempting to structure the songs into larger pieces of music. As Korsakov continued to hone his craft, he existed in a lineage of Russian talent between Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky. He's known for being a member of the Mighty Handful. This group, also known as the Five, was a group of composers who hung out and talked about music. They composed music together, shared ideas, and bounced around different new ideas to make new music. Similar to groups of painters, philosophers, and other artists at the time, the Mighty Handful was a collection of misfits who would bounce these ideas off of each other and compose a variety of music with shared themes of nationalism and resistance to Western traditions. Rather than rely on structural coherence or acceptance from the wider musical world, these musicians were more concerned about creating music that was shareable, often inspired by simple old tunes. Rimsky became a valued member of the Mighty Handful. The others kept asking him to orchestrate their works. Basically, they asked to take their rough drafts and figure out which instrument should play each part to make it sound best. Now, fast forward a bit, and over the next 9 years, Korsakov moves in with another musical icon and member of the Mighty Handful, Mussorgsky, and continues to write music while focusing on his naval duties. At the age of 27, Korsakov applied to become the professor of composition at St. Petersburg Conservatory, and he got the job. The only catch was he still didn't really know the details behind music theory. When Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov taught at the Music Academy in St. Petersburg, Korsakov was learning music theory at the same time as his students. Often he was just only one lecture ahead of his class. Between being a naval officer and teaching courses in musical composition, Nikolai Rimsky Korsakov spent his evenings poring over musical exercises by candlelight. As a professor of music theory, Korsakov taught hundreds of students over his career. He was admired for his ability to explain concepts simply and to make his students just do the work most of the time instead of listening to him drone on. He would structure his lectures into 3 parts. Part 1, I will speak and you will listen. Part 2, I will speak less and you will start to work. And Part 3, I will not speak at all and you will work. Korsakov became known as a composer for his nationalistic style. During this period, Rimsky gained some controversy for becoming too Western. His style was shifting from Russian nationalism to more conventional forms and ideas. He received encouragement from Tchaikovsky, but he was still less popular than Tchaikovsky and the other composers, even during his lifetime. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov links the chain of musical history between the older Russian composers throughout history, his contemporaries, his students, and then their students later on. He bridges the sort of gap in this classical period by dividing the structurally sound and pure music of the West from the archaic, weird Russian romantic composers, up until the 20th century modernists, experimentalists, and even the jazz musicians. Korsakov is a nice example of someone who fought for new ideas in both his music and through his actions. He just did what he liked doing and learned to meet in the middle somewhere between his natural creativity and the theoretical tools that most musicians need to make musical sense. Korsakov's music tells a story. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who mainly produced purely symphonic works and music just to express the raw musical ideas, Korsakov wrote music to tell stories. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov lives on in relative obscurity by mainstream standards. While being well known in classical circles for a few big successes, his name doesn't have the same staying power as many other Russian composers before, during, or since his lifetime. History remembers the great composers who shake things up. We remember the people who master the art of composition, people who write endless classics, and people who change our understanding of the art form itself. But we rarely take time to remember the people who sit on the sidelines and make significant contributions behind the scenes. I can't tell you the names of any teachers or coaches in the upper echelon of peak performance who haven't been top performers on their own merit. I at least want to take today to appreciate a person who bridges the gap between knowledge and practice. I want to acknowledge the legacy of a person who wrote some great music. He did it his way and without needing to take the most straightforward path. He took the scenic route to becoming a person whose love of music translated into teaching the next generation how to create. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov is a name that few may remember, but I hope that we can all remember just a little bit more when the bee starts buzzing.